My colleagues, we have returned back from recess. System has been updated. Senator Kelly, if you please can continue.
In looking at the household incomes, there are incomes for joint filers, individual filers, and head of household. If you've been able to look at those, again, do they fit within something that's standardized? Do they make sense with you? The one that seemed a little bit different is the one for the head of household. And if you could also help us understand those different categories. Somebody had asked me about individuals, and I was explaining that perhaps people who were single parents or adopted, but if you could go through the different categories so we understand them, and then to see if those are standard amounts that we're looking at or ones that have shown up elsewhere.
Thank you, Senator. With regards to the categories, meaning the $150,000 in the case of a joint return, the $112,500 in the case of head of household, or the $75,000 in the case of a taxpayer not described in paragraphs 1 or 2, which is basically a single filer, these actually follow the CARES Act. And so these are the same adjusted gross income or AGI thresholds that were used to determine eligibility for the filers who received, to determine eligibility for the purpose of economic impact payments under the CARES Act. That's one. And so in terms of what is a joint filer or a head of household or a single filer is basically just somebody who doesn't have a dependent or doesn't have a spouse to file with. We also have, for joint returns, obviously it's going to be people who file joint because they're married and they file joint. And a head of household is somebody who is not married, but they have dependents that they can claim on their tax returns. And those dependents can either be their child or some other dependent that they are able to claim because they provide more than half of their support. And that individual who they're claiming as a dependent does not make over a certain threshold. And I hope that helps, Senator.
Thank you. And again, it's good to know that it's following a system that's in place so that everything lines up very nicely. The terminology used here is individual tax filer. Is that different than single tax filer? Yeah, we just want to make sure that it makes sense for its intended purpose.
Right, and so an individual tax filing would be for a single person or a married filing separate. So there's two types. So we basically have 4 categories. One is going to be single, married filing separate, married filing joint, and then head of household. So the $75,000 would apply to a single taxpayer, which would mean that they're basically not filing joint with anybody. And to your point, Senator, yes, these are standard categories that are utilized in the tax system.
Thank you, Senator Kelly.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Therese, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. All right, so the bill that's in front of us right now says that they're going to give $500 each up to, and we've heard estimates of about 8,000 people times $500, about 4 million, and the bill allows a transfer up to 10,000, and it lists very specific sources of where this transfer could come out of. And so, of course, we've heard from Mr. Carlson that we have a letter now, and the letter says, well, the letter just confirms that, the 4 million, and transfer up to 10 million, and he says that they would be able to do this pretty much, that with these proposed funding options, the Bureau should be able to identify the available funds to cover the cost requirements of the program. But of course, today, Mr. Carlson has told us that he supports, and the governor supports, using the CARES Act funds. And so I think that's a great move. Of course, I think for months we're all looking for this CARES Act funds to get relief out as quickly as possible. But we did receive a CARES Act budget, maybe in May, early May, and I wanted to know if then would there be an amendment to this CARES Act money? Where from the kind of projected expenditures for the CARES funds would that come from?
Thank you, Senator. During the recess, I spoke with the author and suggested that on page 6, she add letter E, something to the effect of any federal stimulus fund source the governor elects to use as just to account for the CARES Act funding.
So are you talking about this funds that was budgeted, that we commonly refer to as the CARES Act money, or some other fund source?
More specifically, the Coronavirus Relief Fund.
Are you familiar with this budget I'm talking about, the May 5th, 2020? It's called the, I don't know what it's called, but it's COVID-19 Relief Fund Revenues and Expenditures.
The revenue, I mean, you know,
It's called the CARES Act Fund budget, according to the governor.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
All
and
right.
like any other budget, there's room for modification.
Yes, that's why I'm asking.
Yes.
Do you intend to use these monies? And if so, where would
That's the 117 million?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so where would the modification be to get the 10 million?
But there's a couple of areas that we're looking at simply because of timing. We have to expend everything by December 30th. So there, some of the areas there, while they're well-intentioned, may just not logistically be able to be expended. So we're taking a look at it, but the commitment's there to find the money.
So you're not able to detail that for us today?
Not exactly, simply because, you know, if I take something away from there, then I need to make sure that there's no quote-unquote harm done for what it is that we're trying to address here. But the ability to find $4 million, given Senator Shelton's estimate of 8,000 eligible recipients, we don't find that to be a difficult task.
All right, so we're not going to get any details as to where from this COVID budget that's going to come from, but the bill still authorizes up to 10. I mean, I know you're saying 4 million, but it authorizes up to 10 million. Okay, so I wanted to know if I guess, yeah, of course I want to know where it's going to come from out of this budget, what item it's going to be prioritized over. It sounds like you are deeming it a priority, and if so, I guess I'm curious why it just was not done. I mean, you don't need us to do that if it's going to come out of this fund or this budget.
Well, it would be very appropriate to establish the program. So I believe it's a necessary legislative function that we're all collectively here to support. So having the program set up and then the governor providing the funding seems to be appropriate.
All right. Was there any legislative program set up before you guys sent out the other funds here?
No.
The welfare benefits?
No.
Okay.
This wasn't on our radar.
All right. But legislative appropriation is not necessary.
That's correct.
All right, so back to the bill before us. So it lists 4 funding sources, and I just wanted to follow up. First of all, is there a fiscal note? I saw your letter, but is there a fiscal note?
No, ma'am. The bill was introduced, I believe, this morning. So in response to the merit of the bill, I wrote a letter, and I got the call from Senator San Augustine's office about an alternate fund source. So this is kind of evolving pretty quickly, but in a very positive way.
All right. Well, your letter I noticed from in your BBMR director capacity, and so you do say that you can fund this up to $10 million from these sources that are listed here. So if I could just ask you, one of the sources here is the War Claims Fund. What is the balance of that fund?
You want to answer that?
Senator Therese, if we can just stick to just the bill.
I am in the bill. The bill
Oh,
is
because
authorizing,
okay.
yes.
Okay, no problem. Withdraw.
The bill authorizes, the transfer from the War Claims Fund. I think that's item D. So I just wanted to know what is the balance of that fund?
Senator, I'll attempt to answer
Thank
the
you,
question.
Mr. Byrne.
We received 12.1 million back from U.S. Treasury. We are in the process of paying out about 8.4 million in tax refunds this week out of that 12 million, and the balance will be paid next week.
Mr. Chair, can you please ask Mr. Byrne to restate what he just said clearly into the mic? It's very
Okay.
muted, and you,
Just, if you can just repeat
Thank
that,
you.
Ed, if you can just repeat your response because it didn't come out too clear.
I wonder if it's the microphone, or maybe I'm not used to this particular microphone, and I apologize, Senator.
like an ice cream cone, Mr. Byrne. Put the mic to your mouth like an ice cream cone.
So you were able to hear what I just said?
Yeah,
Okay, I will attempt to
you.
repeat it using the same words if I can. Is we received 12.1 million from the U.S. Treasury in repayment of the war claims that we paid out from local funds. This week we're paying about 8.4 million in tax refunds out of that 12 million, and we're scheduling the balance to be paid out next week. So by the end of next week, we will have effectively paid out the 12 million that we received in tax refunds.
Mr. Byrne, according to the War Claims Fund statute, it says any funds transferred to the fund shall only be used to pay compensable Guam victims with certified claims by the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission, and such use shall be consistent with a MOA between DOA and U.S. Treasury. The fund shall be exempt from the governor's transfer authority, and any funds remaining shall be subject to legislative appropriation. All money reimbursed for payment of claims shall be deposited in the fund. So you're saying that you're able to pay out of this fund tax refunds without a legislative appropriation out of the fund?
Senator, tax refunds are already appropriated.
Yes, from the general fund, right?
Yes.
All right, but you're paying it out of this special fund that was supposed to be locked up, right? Subject to appropriation, it says, and used only for that one purpose. All right, I'm going to move on. So you intend to spend all the money, the 12.1 million? There will be no balance?
There is a small amount yet to be received from the U.S. Treasury due to our having to reconcile some documents with them.
All right, so
But it is intended that the tax refunds will take account of the total amount that we've received to date.
all right, if that's the case, then this fund is not necessarily available for this program, if you're saying you're
yes,
using it.
and that is why Mr. Carlson is suggesting that we use the CARES Act money.
All right, well, he, in his letter says we can use these funds. So I'm going to move to the next one. Mr.
No, your 5 minutes are up. We'll come back for a second round, Senator Therese. Senator Tello, Title Minority Leader, do you have any questions, ma'am? My colleagues, please be reminded, you got 5 minutes. I got notified, and then I just let you know, even though you exceeded during the question, I just try to cut it off at the end.
Okay.
All right? But we have another round. We have 2 rounds.
Thank you,
So we'll
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, actually, I thought you were going to start right after Senator Terlaje, go to Senator Sabina, but if that's why I'm kind of surprised. So you're going zigzag. Okay. Anyways, thank you everyone for being here. it was quite alarming to hear that funds are being utilized out of the war claims without legislative approval. So that's something we're going to have to definitely look into. But, you know, I was concerned about this bill because it was going into the general fund, utilizing $10 million from the general fund. Now I see that the bill is, or at least the administration is willing to use CARES Act fund. And as well, I have the same budget up here, and I heard that not excuse, but reasoning behind how you're going to utilize that. So my question is, so Lester, if do you support the $10 million for this, or do you support $4 million for this?
By the senator's calculation of 8,000 eligible recipients, we're using the $4 million that she's saying. And yes, the bill does say up to 10, but it appears that she's identified a more specific category, thus requiring $4 million.
Mr. Chair, point of information.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you very much. So yes, it is a rough estimate for $4 million with the 4,000 students in the Department of Education, the 4,000 students at the University of Guam and Guam Community College. But I do realize that there is a category that I was unable to gather data for, which is private school students, as well as individuals with disability. There's no real database of individuals with disabilities who are claimed as dependents, and so this could be much more than $4 million, and the amount of $10 million transfer authority would allow for the governor to ensure that we pay these families with individuals with disabilities who are dependents.
All right, thank you. Senator Tello, if you...
I apologize, Mr. Chair. If we could just have the author of the bill restate. Another microphone was on, and so it was difficult to hear.
Okay. Senator Amanda, one more time.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I said, the rough estimate is that there are 4,000 students within the Department of Education, 4,000 students at the Guam Community College and the University of Guam who would also be eligible, but there is no data for private school students who are qualified in that age category, as well as the individuals with disabilities who are beyond the age of 16 who are still claimed as dependents of their families.
Great, thank you. Senator Tello,
Thank you, Mr.
continuation, please.
Thank you. I hope my time doesn't go on to that one. But anyways, the next one I had with the disabilities, in the CARES Act stimulus package, if I'm not mistaken, if individuals did not file a tax return or who is considered independent, there is a form they can fill out at Rev and Tax in order to receive their $1,200. Is that correct, Daphne?
Yes, Senator, there's a form for individuals who, yes, there is
Do
a form.
not meet the
Yes, who do meet
criteria,
right,
the
who do not
normal
meet-
criteria.
Yes, ma'am.
And how about people with disabilities? Is there a form for individuals with disabilities that can fill out the form to be able to receive that $1,200 stimulus as well?
There's no specific form for individuals with disabilities. You know, people file income tax returns based on, you know, if they meet certain income requirements, and then they will file the non-filer form based on if they have no filing requirement because they don't meet the threshold. So there isn't any specific form for individuals with disabilities, ma'am.
But there is a process in which they can still receive stimulus checks in another way, right?
If individuals with disabilities file a non-filer form, for whatever reason, of course, they would have to have not been claimed as a dependent on their, you know, on another person's tax return.
Makes sense,
So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Mr. Chair, I have here, and it's already on the drive, I have an amendment here on page 3, line
Senator Tello,
line 3, page 6.
after all the questions, and then we'll dismiss the panel, then we do the amendments.
Okay, well, Mr. Chair, okay, I'll wait until it, but I have an amendment out that uses CARES Act instead of General Fund Act, that amendment that's already been proffered to the clerks for them to review. So it is on the site, the website right now for that amendment.
Understood.
Okay, thank you so much.
You have any other questions, ma'am?
No, then I'll just wait the next round.
All right,
pretty
thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much.
Senator Luis Muñoz, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this could be for the author. So the 8,000 really was the most minimal estimate then. I mean, are you looking at maybe 12,000 people, approximately 15,000 maybe we're looking at? I'm not sure.
Okay, Senator Amanda, do you yield to the questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, as I stated earlier, the real data that we could collect is from the Department of Education as well as the University of Guam and the Guam Community College. We are unable to collect data for homeschool students, for private school students, and so this is where we leave the flexibility, especially for every individual who is a dependent and is a individual with disability. We don't know on an individual tax filer form, it doesn't ask you to state there, is your dependent an individual with a disability? So we just can't gather that data at this time, and it's hard to give an exact number of how many more people would be added on in addition to the students that we already know of.
Senator Luis,
so
did that answer the question?
Yeah, well, so my question then would be, could there be a possibility then that it could be more than $10 million that we're looking at?
Senator Shelton.
It very well could be a possibility, but I think that this is the least conservative number that we allowed for in the legislation. So I think this gives us a lot of breathing room.
All right, Senator Luis.
Okay, yeah, my question now for DRT. Is DRT allowed under federal law to examine individual federal income tax returns, Form 1040, to see who qualifies?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. One of the concerns, of course, of my team is that, the use of income tax returns perhaps may not be appropriate for this program. However, that is why the use of an actual application form would have to be, again, it would be done. And it would actually be appropriate also because, one, our data does not indicate age, so we cannot carve out an age range. So if you wanted to try to figure out how many 17 and 18-year-olds are, we can't do that. The other piece of it is also our data doesn't also indicate if an individual is disabled, so we can't tell that as well. So, the use of an application form is really the most appropriate means, and that's really the mechanism that we intend to use if this is passed. Thank you.
Senator Luis.
Yes, that suffices. I have a couple more questions.
No problem.
So it does mention the application. You talked about the application. So does that mean that everyone, unlike the economic impact payments, needs to apply to get this benefit?
Yes, ma'am. So that would need to happen, and again, as I mentioned, we're really doing our best. The mechanism that we hope to utilize is going to be kind of an electronic submission process. So that's something, again, we have not yet begun that process, but we will be working with our team to make sure that that is able to happen.
Okay. And are there safeguards to prevent information on the application from being public? Federal income tax records are private documents, so will there be safeguards for the information on that application?
Thank you for asking that, Senator. Yes, already, we do have the ability for people to register online at our myguamtax.com website to file certain Form 1040s that meet certain criteria online. Also, you can also file the EIP, the non-filer form online. And we work with our vendor to make sure that we're able to pass the IRS safeguard, system review. So all of those, in terms of security measures, we absolutely take security as a very serious issue, and we want to make sure that there is no possibility, of course, of that happening, or that the possibility is very low if it happens. And again, there will have to be a very good security system that's put in place, ma'am.
Okay, so this application then, once developed, will be online too, as well?
Yes, that's the intention, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, that's it. That's my final question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Luis. Senator Pt.2, do you have any questions, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I just want to thank the panel for sharing this moment with us. And I just want to thank the Director of Revenue and Taxation because what you have mentioned, I would think that you're set to release the money based on this program. The only thing that I wanted to ask is that, it looks like the magical number being used here is 8,000. And if there's more than, if the 4,000 is not enough, what other funding program can be used for this particular bill?
All right, Senator Pito, I think that may be answered by BBMR.
Thank you, Senator. We're committed to find the funding necessary for this program. So if it's 4 million, 6 million, 10 million, this is an error, in our opinion, in the federal stimulus that omitted these categories, and we'd like to be able to utilize the same fund source to make the wrong right.
And the reason why I asked that, sir, is because, we're talking about the $4 million that we're talking about. So if we exhaust the $4 million and we don't satisfy the other recipients that are qualified to get this money, that's why I asked this. And it's clear that you're going to find the funding source to accommodate and satisfy those that, if it's over $8,000, not 8,000. Is that 8,000?
8,000 eligible recipients is the working number. There's been some discussion about how that number may increase, and again, we're committed to provide the funds for it.
Okay. Just one more. Is the $500 that's going to be given to these qualified individuals, is that taxable?
Sir, yes. With regards to compensation, unless it's specifically excluded by means of in the code, it will be considered taxable.
Thank you, Madam Director. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Pito. Senator Amanda, as the author, you don't have any questions? Senator Sabina Perez, ma'am, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a question for Daphne regarding what is it going to cost administratively? I know DRT is very much swamped with a lot of the impact relief program, and I'm just wondering what kind of capacity do you need to carry out this program and the cost associated with it?
Thank you, Senator Perez. With regards to the cost, this is something that we're still going to have to work on. And however, of course, there will be, we're expecting some level of system costs and also some costs in terms of administration. So, we're going to have to allocate resources in terms of human resource to make sure that we are able to make these payments. Of course, there's the issue of postage and, envelopes and checks, and all of those we may have to make sure that those are taken care of, and those are kind of the standard costs that we expect. I don't have an actual cost. I know perhaps because the idea is to use up to 10 million, then if we were to utilize, 20,000 potential payouts, if that's $10 million as the max, then we can utilize that as kind of a basis for determining supplies and postage and other things, maybe. But again, I don't have an actual amount at this time.
What about overtime costs or potentially adding more employees to carry out the program? Maybe that's something you can look at too in regards.
Yes, ma'am. And again, thank you for bringing up the issue of overtime. Of course, we want to make sure that we get these payments out as soon as possible. So, again, if this bill is passed and we want to make sure these get paid out as soon as possible, if there's a need for overtime, we'll definitely we'll indicate that as well. Thank you.
The other question I have is regarding the feasibility of coming up with rules within 30 days and then processing applications within 30 days. And again, that probably stems from the resources that you have available to do that. So would you say that's feasible, or what would you think is more realistic as far as getting it implemented?
Yeah, with regards, again, even when we were working on the EIP program, it was difficult to say a time frame. I know that the intention is to make sure that we get payments out to our people as soon as possible. As we've been working to do everything that we do, of course, we have as our number one priority making sure we service our people, get payments as soon as possible, and that's always been at the primary kind of goal for us. It's difficult to say if 30 days is going to be sufficient for the rules and regs, if there is need for us to go ahead and again do so, most especially if we have to go through the AAA process. But that's something, again, I would have to kind of bring back to my team so we can make sure that we get those done. Of course, we would be able to kind of utilize certain guidelines that we already have in place as perhaps a foundation, so it's not like we would be starting from zero. And again, I would still have to go back to my team in terms of making sure that we can identify kind of a good timeline. We don't want to throw out a timeline and then not be able to make it. We want to make sure our people, in terms of their expectations, that they have a good idea about when the monies are going to be coming, most especially because, people really depend on these monies. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So earlier you mentioned that you wanted to use more of the online service. Is that set up already, or is that something you're going to have to start from scratch?
So we do already have certain things that we do online in terms of, for example, the filing of Form 1040s, which meets certain criteria. Also, the filing of the online form. Those were things. The online form is actually a new form, which we had worked to develop during this pandemic period, and which we rolled out, and I think we had released on April 19. So the CARES Act passed March 27. We rolled that form out on April 19. And so, it took a little bit, it took a little bit of time for us to work on that. Again, systems-wise, it's difficult to say, but, we have developed really good rapport with our systems team and also our vendor. This is something we'd work with them on that. It's not, again, like we don't have, something in place to kind of utilize as a baseline. We're not going to start from zero because we do already have our website. We have a system, but again, in terms of trying to work to develop the application, I would really need to go back to them in order to be able to provide you responsibly with a good timeline and a good basis for an amount.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is a question for Mr. Carlson. So regarding the commitment to be able to support the group that has been left out with the CARES funding. Would that also include commitment towards administrative costs?
We'll work with Daphne.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Torres, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an observation on page 2, section 2, line 8. What this bill does is it establishes the Azure y Mangafa program, but I don't see specific language establishing the program. In other words, there is hereby established a program called this for the distinct purpose of so-and-so. And the other thing I want to point out is, now that we know that the funds will most likely be CARE funds, which is federal funds, section 2A reads, subject to an appropriation by Legislature in Guam, the director of DRT shall administer the program, the Azure y Mangafa program, and distribute payments. So is that going to be subject to an amendment because we're not going to be appropriating local funds?
That's correct, Senator.
Okay.
Senator Torres. We have to keep in mind, my colleagues, this just started this morning, and when my office got a hold of Mr. Lester, I found out about this as they're walking in that, okay, we have a source. Okay.
Right, but it's just...
And you're correct. An amendment would be in order, ma'am.
Right, an amendment would be in order because there is no appropriation of local funds, number one. But I think that the need to stand up the program, I think, is is lacking here. And aside from that, I did have, concerns about the application process, but I think Mrs. Shimizu very adequately explained why that was necessary, and I thank you for that, differentiating why this is different from the other one where DRT determined what families would get the stimulus money and how much. So in this case, it's a different set of circumstances, and I understand why you cannot ascertain the ages of the kids and all of that. But I just want, general comment, Mr. Chair, I just want to bring that up, that, we will have to get back to this in the amendment section. But thank you, panel members, for being here also.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lee, ma'am, do you have any questions?
Yes, sir. Sudasmasi, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for joining us and for answering all the questions from my colleagues. I also have a few questions. If you can turn to Section 6 of the bill on reporting. I just wanted to ask, what would be, so I apologize, that's page 6, Section 6, and I'll just read it for folks who are watching at home. Upon the lifting of the Public Health Emergency Declaration for Guam, the Department of Revenue and Taxation and the Department of Administration shall submit a report to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guam, which shall include the cumulative amount of payments under the Azuda y Mangafa program, Help for Families, and the authorized amounts transferred by Imagahaga and Guahan under Section 4 of this Act. And so what I wanted to pose a question to both Daphne and Mr. Byrne is, there's no timeline associated with this report, and I would like to proffer an amendment that would allow for that timeline, but I just wanted to get some feedback from the two of you as to what would be a reasonable timeline to provide that report to the legislature.
Thank you, Senator. We have a number of reporting requirements associated with all these funds, but I don't think that we would struggle if we had 30 days to report. It's a fairly straightforward report that you're asking for.
Thank you. Ms. Shimizu?
Yes, thank you, Senator. And I tend to agree with also Director Byrne that, for example, if the month ended June, we were able, for the month ended June, for us to be able to provide some information by the end of the following month, that should be sufficient time. Again, like you mentioned, it is pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both. On Section 5, I know that Daphne had spoken and answered a previous colleague's question about the funding and the delivery of payments. I apologize, I'm reading, there's two Section 5s, so I think we're going to have to make an amendment on that. But the first Section 5, it's the delivery of payments. And Ms. Shimizu, if you could, for the body and just for my information, if you could just repeat the timeline for the delivery of payments, estimated timeline that it would take to be able to process these.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Again, it's a little bit difficult to tell. Our intention really is to try to do everything electronically. And, again, when the CARES Act passed, it took us a little bit of time for us to get the non-filer form online. We were able to get it up by April 19 when the CARES Act passed March 27. This is something, I would definitely have to work with our systems team on. But, we believe, again, that the main mechanism for filing, it's really best to do electronically for multiple reasons. Again, one, because of the issue of course, our pandemic and people's health and, the move to try to do things online as much as possible. And two, because, as Senator Perez, mentioned earlier, the issue of administration and trying to make sure that we're, we have the human resource available. And of course, especially at this time when we're in Pt.2 and we're really only able to operate at about 50%, no more than 50% of our capacity, it makes it a little bit challenging to have people, a lot of people in our office processing.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shimizu. Also, you had mentioned in a response to a previous colleague about this this payment, this program being taxable income, for lack of a better word, would this also be subject to any garnishment from Guam Memorial Hospital or child support or?
Ma'am, I'm sorry. That's something I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's something that perhaps if there's an intention to make sure that these are not garnished, similar to what the CARES Act required, then perhaps that may be something that the legislative body may need to add. For the CARES Act, with regards to EIP, it's only the only garnishment that's allowed for is for child support. And again, in terms of the legal basis for garnishments, I am not sure if this particular, how that would impact this particular bill.
Suzusmasi, Mizu, and again, I'm also aware of the fact that we're talking about many of the people that would benefit from this program would be students or individuals in our community with disabilities. So that's another kind of thing to think about. But I appreciate your response. I certainly am a supporter of this bill, and I will reserve any additional questions, Mr. Chair, for our next round. Sujus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Madam Vice Speaker, do you have any question, ma'am, at this time? None? Senator Clint, no questions. We will now proceed to the second round, and we'll begin with Senator Jim Moylan. Do you have any questions? This is your final round, sir. You got 5 minutes.
I'll use less. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After listening to colleagues' questions, they're reassuring myself that whether it be 8,000 or more people qualified for this payout, we are still using 100% of the CARES fund, which is was given to us at 117 or close to 118 million dollars that we're reassigning the money to give in support of this bill. At no way are we going to use general funds or special funds. All those will be amended in this bill. So we're strictly focused on the federal funding from the CARES Act. And if I may ask for Mr. Carlson, please, if there's an idea of the 117 million, how much is spent so far, please?
Out of the 117 million, we have 20 million for the public assistance program and 20 million for the business grants. So the remainder is available for reprogramming because we've already committed the business grants, and we're working already with Mr. Byrne here I think you've done 12 or 13 million?
The public assistance program has totaled about 13 million to date.
Yeah, to date.
We have sufficient to provide for this, so that's good to hear. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if I can draw your attention, to page 4 of the bill, section 4, line 3. I had a sidebar with the prime author, and I want to ask the author if she would yield, and the question would be this: just to affirm the intent or the spirit of the legislation so that it would cover homeschooled students. There's a specific citation in the U.S. Code that defines what a homeschool is and a homeschool student is, and it's pretty explicit in the U.S. Code, and I just want to memorialize for the public record that it is her intent as well that we cover those students that qualify or who may be considered to be homeschool students. And that would be any student that has an instructor, in this case, most often than not on Guam, it's a parent, and in a place where the instruction occurs for at least 3 or 4 hours. And so if in the same place that they're receiving the instruction, okay? So I just want to make sure that that's the stated intent of the prime author. Can I get that on the record if the author would yield?
Senator Amanda, you yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, Mr. Chair, that is the intent, to include all students who qualify over the age of 16 who are dependents, including homeschooled students.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, no questions. Senator Kelly, you may continue on with your questioning, ma'am. You've got 5 minutes, ma'am.
I did want to use this time to say that I really appreciated the comment that Mr. Carlson had made, that this corrects a wrong. And we have heard that discussion at the national level, that it was an error on their part. And this is the time that we should be making sure that as comprehensively as possible, we are really helping out these families. And so I just wanted to point out, I thought that was a very important statement and an important one for us all to be hearing and thinking about. To your knowledge, is there anybody else that has been left out with what the intentions were or what they will be going forward?
I think that there was some reference to immigrants in some of the research that we did. I'm not sure if that is going to be something that's picked up in the future, but some of the research that we did to support what was first Bill 364 did this did come up in addition to the dependents. It was immigrants. So
Just to make sure I heard you correctly, did you say immigrants?
immigrants, yeah.
Well, it's been a very active round. Most of the questions, I believe, or all of them that I had written, I think, have been answered. So I will see if I can reserve the remaining time just in case, but Suzuis Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Therese, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I wanted to follow up on the question about the 117 million. We have not received here at the legislature the report of the expenditures as was mandated by the override of Bill 333. So did you say that you're only spending the 20 plus the 20? Or has more of that been spent, of the 117?
I think Senator Moylan asked what has been committed, and the response was we've committed 40 out of the 117.8 or 9. There are expenditures for the quarantine facilities that we're reconciling right now, because that's an ongoing commitment and obligation. But I sent out a circular last week basically requesting that anybody that had preliminarily put in for funding, specifically for immediate response, PPEs, sanitization of the facilities, to send us invoices and we would reimburse them. I haven't gotten anything from any of the agencies. I expect that I will, though, because there was a lot of correspondence that we received from agencies detailing immediate action that they had to take to make the workplace safe for the employees first, and then when we started receiving customers, customer-facing situations. So we are trying to get, from an audit perspective, all of the necessary documentation to show how the money was spent, including asking upfront for the invoices to substantiate any reimbursements or any expenditures.
So how much would you estimate is still available?
I think the quarantine facilities is probably eating up the largest amount. We initially budgeted $4 million, but I believe that we're going to have to make some adjustments for the ongoing quarantine program. I'm working with Homeland Security and GSA to get that reconciliation done as soon as possible.
So you don't have an estimate. According to this budget, was it $4 million?
That's what we put down.
And so, but you think it's higher than that right now?
Oh, yes, already it's exceeded the 4
Like
million.
what, 10
I don't think so.
less?
Somewhere in the middle, but it's an ongoing program, so we're going to have to try to project what those costs and those needs are.
All right. Thank you. Then on the rest of the funding sources that you said, if they remained intact, they would be able to provide the direct assistance. Is there any money in the rainy day fund?
Yes, Senator, there is, but there is also a bill to take it out. So I don't think we want to go down that path, right? We've already said there's enough money in the CARES Act to pay for this, so I don't think we want to look beyond that.
Well, that's what Mr. Carlson has said, but the bill right now does not say that. So that's why it's going to be up to the legislature to decide. And I guess one of the reasons we should decide that is if these funding sources are actually not available to us, right? And if CARES Act is available to us. So I just think it's rational that we're going to add. That's the funding sources listed here. So it says rainy day fund, and you're saying that there is a balance?
There is a balance of about 3 million in the rainy day fund.
2 million?
3.
Oh, 3, okay.
3.
All right.
But that's obviously not going to pay for the whole amount, and that's why the recommendation is to use the CARES Act fund.
I understand. All right, and what about it also says transfers from fiscal year 2020 general fund appropriations, but when I read the CRER, it looks like the actual revenue versus appropriation, we are actual of minus 4.9 million based on the April report. I'm sorry, that's a projected year end, minus 4.9. Is there any money available here in the general fund appropriations to transfer for this program?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Again, this is a fluid and evolving process. When I got a phone call from Senator San Augustine asking, because of the impact on local resources, whether or not the CARES Act funds would be available. We ran that through the governor. The governor said yes. So we're actually, as Mr. Byrne mentioned, it's there in the bill. We thought we could make the bill happen. We are committed now to using only the CARES Act funding. So the support was always there for this.
Yes.
And we really wanted to make it work. So the intention of my letter to Senator Shelton was just to be able to reinforce that support.
All right, but if you could answer the question, is there money available in the 2020 appropriations to fund this up to 10 million?
Since it's not what it is we're asking to be used anymore, I don't know what appropriateness the question is.
Okay, I don't think it's your job to determine if our questions are appropriate. I'm asking a question based on the bill that is in front of me, that you wrote a letter and said that there is enough money in this list of sources to pay 10 million, and I'm trying to get to the truth of that.
Yeah, specifically it says the Bureau should be able to identify the available funds to cover the cost requirements of this program. So when we took a look at what it was that was available, we were very positive that we could find at least $4 million, and that's what my letter says.
All
so
right.
Do I stand by that statement? Yes, I do. But it has evolved to where we don't envision at all using any government resources.
Right, but the choice is ours, if it's whether we're going to pass the bill or not. It's your choice to use CARES. You could have done that 3 days ago, 3 months ago. You could have done that without anything from the legislature. So if you could just answer the questions. So where is there $4 million available in general fund appropriations to transfer?
I think I did answer the question.
You're saying yes, there is?
I said at the time we were committed to support the program.
All right, and you said that was today.
Yes.
You said you wrote your letter today, the bill was introduced today.
Yes.
Yes, all right. So is $4 million available in general fund appropriations?
we don't need to even consider that. So I
Mr.
don't
Chair.
understand why you keep asking that question.
Because it's in the bill, Mr. Byrne. And, I'm sorry, Mr. Carlson, that's why you're here, is to answer the questions.
I think Senator Therese, I think he did answer the question. His letter started out with,
No, Mr. Chair, the letter says, supports the intent of Bill 367 with the proposed funding options intact to provide the direct assistance to those individuals. And all I want to know is if we are telling the truth or not, and I want to know if there was $4 million
Excuse me, ma'am?
available this morning.
Excuse me?
Then where is it available? That's a very simple question from our fiscal people. Very simple. It's either available or it's not.
Senator Therese, let's take a quick recess, okay? My colleagues, we're back from recess. Reminder, the panel has taken an oath. So take that at heart. If you have any debate of the whatever, I just recommend you just keep away from it. They've taken an oath and we'll move on. Senator Reese, you may continue your questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to repeat my question. It's a yes or no answer. Was there $4 million available in general fund appropriations to fund this bill? Or is there 10 million? Sorry, 10 million is what the bill says.
The working number this morning when I wrote the letter, was $4 million. And the answer to the question is yes.
All right, and is that still available if we reduce the BPT by 5 million?
Pardon me?
If the business privilege tax is reduced by 5 million, as is proposed in a bill that's in third reading right now, would that 4 million still be available?
I'm not following you. What bill were you talking about?
If the BPT is reduced,
Oh, you mean from 5% to 4%?
no, we're giving a tax break in one of the bills that's in third reading right now. It would reduce, according to your fiscal note, it would reduce BPT collections by 5 million. If that passes, is there still 4 million available in the general fund appropriations?
Yes.
And can you tell us from where that would be, you could find that money to be transferred?
As Mr. Byrne mentioned earlier, there is money available from the reimbursement for war claims. His preference is to pay it out for tax refunds, but since he hasn't cut the checks yet, and we were committed to this very, very appropriate measure, that fund source could have been available. You had a discussion earlier about the rainy day fund, and he answered your question about the amounts there, so there's money there. So when we wrote the letter, we understood that there was money in those 2 out of the 4 accounts that could be made available.
All right, and what about the general fund appropriations? Is there money, is there 4 million available to be transferred from general fund appropriations?
Yes.
From where? Because the rainy day fund and the war claims fund are separate items on this bill. One is the general fund appropriation, second is the special fund, third is the rainy day fund, fourth is the war claims fund.
Okay, maybe I misspoke. The war claims was available, but the preference is to use it for tax refunds. The rainy day fund, again, Mr. Byrne mentioned that any deposits have stopped, but there was a balance. So do we want, or is there general fund money available after Senator San Augustine's phone call and our further discussion? We believe that we should not use that money, so the answer is no.
But the question is not whether you believe you should use it, but is it available for transfer? No? Not available?
It's probably not appropriate to even look.
All right, why is that?
Senator Therese, your time is up. We will now move to Senator Tello. Your 5 minutes is up. Senator Tello.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to ask one question, and then I'm going to yield the rest of my time to Senator Therese Chalahi to finish on a question. So if she can continue her line of question and then reserve 1 minute for me, I'll be fine.
All right, your time. Senator Therese, continue.
I just lost my train of thought. I think I was asking where might the 5 million or 4 million be transferred from the general fund appropriations?
And I think I clarified my statement saying that I said yes initially, and then I changed that to no.
Oh yeah, and you said it was inappropriate to transfer 4 million out of the general funds, and I had asked you why. But, you know, I don't want to play games, Mr. Chair, so I'm going to move on to the next question. The war claims amount that we originally used to pay war claims locally was reimbursed, and now you're saying you used it for tax refunds, which is great, but can you tell us where the war claims amount was originally taken from? Which appropriations, which agencies, or where did it come from?
It was taken from the general fund.
Yes. So are that excess revenues or lapsed revenues, or were they from appropriations from 2020?
I really can't answer that question. It was taken from the general fund. As you know, revenues that we collected at the beginning of the year were in excess of what was expected. And I think everybody was happy because I think we answered, you asked me that question previously. There was a bill that appropriated those monies to pay the war claims. And so effectively, yes, it was appropriated through that bill or that law.
I got the bill here. If I wasn't in a rush, I could pull it up and read it to you and tell you exactly what it says about where it's going to be funded. But could you, I also wanted to ask, so what is the final amount on excess revenues for 2019?
The audit's not yet complete. I expect it to be complete within a very few weeks.
And what do you're saying you spent excess revenue, so what did you believe them to be when you spent that money?
I think you're mixing up two years.
Oh, you
There were revenues, you asked me about revenues just now for 2019, but the war claims were paid in 2020.
That's right. So you paid it out of 2020 revenue that was in excess of appropriations?
It was paid out through the appropriation in the law.
It says the governor's authorized to transfer sums as are available from the general fund to pay. So where was the money transferred from?
The money was paid out in accordance with the law, and I think I already said there were revenues that we collected at the beginning of this financial year that made that appropriation.
It says they're going to be transferred from the general fund appropriations contained in the Budget Act, Public Law 34-116 and Public Law 35-36. So it specifically says from transfers from those as outlined in those
I can only answer the question the same way.
All right. How much of the deficit has been paid? The 2018 deficit that you've brought up in past discussions, how much of that has been paid during 2020, fiscal year 2020?
Again, we will be able to see that more clearly when we get the 2019 audit, which is, it's due by the end of June. So
right.
If you can,
so you have
if
no
you can
idea?
be patient enough until then, we're trying to finalize the numbers now.
Yeah, I'm sure you have an idea, though. Like you said, it's due in about 15 days. And you're here right now. Can you give us an estimate?
I don't think it would be appropriate to give you an estimate.
All right.
I would rather that we shared the actual numbers when they're available.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chair, I still have questions, but I know that I don't want to take up all the time from the other senators.
Thank you. Senator Tello, you've got 2 minutes remaining.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is to Daphne. Daphne, as I was looking through this, can you clarify some of the safeguards that are there for individuals who actually have filed their tax return and as a student? Because, I worked since I was 16 years old and filing taxes since I was, in my teens going into my 19, 20 and onward. Is there, can you clarify your safeguards with regards to that to ensure that those individuals do not, are given this amount, the 500, because they already received a stimulus?
Okay. Thank you, Senator. With regards to the current EIP program, the CARES Act program, the federal program, of course, that provides for payments to or for dependents that are that are 16-year-olds and under, right? And so this particular bill proposes to provide a $500 payment for those individuals who are 17 and to 24. I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
It's basically just clarifying the safeguards in, I guess, the application form. When they go through it, it's going to do it. And because of this legislation, this bill, you know, like most things that you have a program put in place, you have your rules and regulations. Would it help for Rev and Tax to have that ability to create rules and regulations based on the legislation? There's some parts in here that are not clear, and in things like that. And I've known in the past that if we require an agency to create rules and regs, and they have 30 days, and then it doesn't have to go through the AAA. Like, for instance, I think we had rules and regs for the carnival. It didn't go through the AAA. It actually came to the legislature, and it was approved from there. So would this be helpful, Rev and Tax, to clarify the program through rules and regulations and be able to incorporate things that are not here that would be very helpful for Rev and Tax?
Thank you, Senator. I think that, I guess in line with what is indicated in the bill, yes, it would be helpful to have rules and regs. As you stated, of course, there have been instances where rules and regs have been done not by the AAL or the AAA process, but through legislative process, for example, exactly the games of chance, which happened in this last year. But, you know, I can assure you that DRT will do their best, we will do our best to make sure that our rules and regs for this particular program are going to be going through the proper process, either again via a mechanism that has been utilized, either AAL, or if appropriate and the legislative body deems appropriate, then perhaps through a process like what was done with the carnival rules, the rules and regs for the carnival games of chance, which was done in the last year.
Thank you, Daphne. I have total confidence in your ability to do so and to make sure things are that T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. The last thing is, again, Mr. Chair, I have an amendment that I've already proffered to the clerks, and especially on page, there's a section 5 quoted twice in the bill. There are two section 5s, so that is on page, I don't have all my things, but yeah, it's been, hold on. Yeah, page 5, section 5, and then again, it quotes section 5 again on page 6, so that would need to be corrected as well. So I've done that in my amendment to ensure that was corrected. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Senator Luis, do you have any questions, ma'am? None? Senator Pito?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I just want to, I do have an amendment, but I guess I want to give the opportunity to the sponsor of the bill to make that inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Amanda, the author of the bill, do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask Daphne if you could give us an idea of what language would be appropriate in the bill to make this this payment tax exempt.
Senator Shelton. With regards to taxability, of course, as the legislative body may know, we do mirror the Internal Revenue Code. And with regards to what's taxable or not taxable, most especially because this is a local program, again, unless there is some specific exemption, with regards to the IRC, this is going to be considered taxable. Historically, as per discussions with my team, when our legislative body has tried to promulgate laws that would try to make something tax exempt, there were instances where that was, again, tried to be done, but was not possible only because, again, we mirror the code. And so, in terms of these amounts not being taxable, it is the position of DRT that that's not something that this particular legislative body would be able to do through local law.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much for that. And could you recommend appropriate language for an amendment to prevent this payment from being garnished for any debts to the government aside from the child support as it is in the CARES Act?
And again, you know, to go back to Senator Lee's earlier comment, I'm not sure of what, in terms of, for example, garnishments for GMH, in terms of what the requirements are. Again, if the legislative body wishes to perhaps make sure that this is only garnished for child support, you know, of course, we can look to the CARES Act, and that's something that Senator Shelton, we can assist you with and provide you with that language. I don't have that language readily available at this time, but we can definitely work to provide that to you and to the body.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the panel.
Thank you. Senator Sabina, do you have anything, ma'am? Nothing? Senator Torres, do you have any questions, ma'am? None? Senator Lee? None? Madam Vice Speaker? None? Senator Clint? My colleagues, we have completed the 2 rounds of questions. I will now dismiss the panel, and we will now take a look at the drive and see what amendments, and if your amendment is not here, it won't be entertained. So we'll take a few-minute recess.
Mr. Chair,
so we
before
can
you
clear the
dismiss the
table.
panel, could I ask one more question since there was so much time that was not used?
How many questions do you want to ask, Senator
I'd
Therese?
like to ask at least one.
One question. You got one question, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll give you that one question.
You know, I don't really know why we're going to be limited when we're talking about spending, you know, up to $10 million.
Senator Therese, I gave the rules of engagement.
Yes,
Just
got
let's
it.
follow it. Thank
I'm
you.
going to ask, when that advanced economic impact payments program was done, the governor used local funds to pay out in advance of $1,200 per person. She didn't need any legislative authority. She just did that. And she said at the time that she was going to spend up to $11 million, and that was all that was available in the at the time, that she could not do more. And I guess I'm going to ask the other two, and you did a great job with that, Ms. Shimizu. I just wanted to ask the others, is that $11 million still available for this program or any other program at this time? Because the $11 million was reimbursed by the CARES, right? You reimbursed yourself after you paid out the 11?
Well, it was reimbursed by the IP money.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So is there any other money available in the government of Guam for this or any other program outside the CARES Act?
For what purpose, Senator?
Pardon?
For what purpose, Senator?
Well, for this bill in front of us.
I think we've already tried to convince you that the CARES Act money is going to be used for this bill.
Thank you, Senator Therese. That ends these questions. The panel is now dismissed. Thank you, panelists, for being here tonight. We will take a few-minute recess. The committee of the whole is called back to order. We will now proceed to the floor amendments. First floor amendment that was introduced was from Senator Tello Taidegui, and I know if you look at the time, she had to make the changes, so she would be the first one, and then Senator Amanda, you be next. And then we go down to Senator Sabina.
Thank you. Thank you. Sijus Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my amendment is on line 3, page 6. And it also corrects the section because the bill had 2 section 5s in it. So this makes it section 6 is the first correction. And then it says funding, notwithstanding any provisions of law, rule, or regulations, up to, and then crossing out the Magahagan Guahan is authorized to transfer, and then it says up to $10 million of the funds received by Imagahagan Guahan through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, Public Law 116-136, may be used by the Department of Revenue and Taxation for the purpose of this act. And then it crosses out as may be available for the following, and it strikes out A, B, C, D, all the way through. And at the end, it says to allow the Legislative Council to make technical corrections and renumber the sections appropriately. But I think we did that. But so my bill, the amendment, Mr. Chair, is very simple. It was spoke about tonight, this evening, that the administration is saying that they are going to be using CARES Act money for this. That's good news. Because really, quite frankly, I don't know how we're going to go in the general fund and pull out $10 million and where that's going to come from. So, and then it was also mentioned that there are some areas in the $117 million budget of the CARES Act that the governor provided this legislature on how they're going to spend it, that there's some areas there, it was mentioned, that would allow them to pull from certain agencies because of the time frame needed to spend this money by December. So recognizing that, whatever that may be, recognizing that, I think, Mr. Chair, we can all feel relieved that this funding coming from the CARES Act is more appropriate for this, because what it does is assist those individuals who are left behind. And I appreciate the support of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Does anyone like to speak, Madam Speaker, on this motion, on this amendment?
Sijus Maasi, Mr. Chair, as I look at this amendment and I see the intent and really wanting to try and support the intent, I must say I don't know if this amendment is in order, and I may have to object because as you and I, have been having the opportunity to work on the weekly briefings with the White House and hearing updated information that comes through as it relates to the COVID-19 and all the leaders around the nation and even the tribal leaders. We have been told that the resources that were provided to the different governments were to be expended and authorized for utilization by the governor. Those FAQs that have continued to come down our way specifically states that as it's given, the resources are given to the government, it is up to the chief, Armagahaga, to be the one to expend how it should be delineated and utilized. So because of that, I just want to see if this amendment is in order, because I think it's not in order. I don't know if you need to get legal advice, but I really think that we should take an amendment based on what was provided to us through the FAQs from the White House.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. Point of information.
Okay, is it reference?
Yes, it is. It
you
is
got
in
legal?
reference.
Okay.
It is in reference to that, because we did that research to find out the ability for the legislature or any other state to appropriate any funds from the CARES Act. When the CARES Act is given, it's given to the state, not the governor of Guam, but the state. That being said, Mr. Chair, speaking with couple of individuals who've actually, in the last administration, who dealt with federal funding. If this money had come from DOI, that would be different, like Section 30 money. That's when this legislature has no right to it, because it comes directly from DOI. However, the CARES Act is awarded to the state, not the governor of Guam, but the state. So I think it's in line with the ability to use it. And as well, we heard from Mr. Carlson this evening saying that you asked him that question point blank. And he came out and he told you that it can be used for these purposes. Now, the SALAPI program, that was put into place, and it was asked, could we do the same thing with this bill? Just have the governor have this bill and put it through her own power. But he said, no, this would be appropriate just as well. So, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to put that information out. Thank you.
Understood.
Mr. Chair.
Madam Speaker,
I
other
may.
than that, you may speak. Otherwise, I would go and ask the legal
And if I may,
Yes.
I want to share with you, as I noted, that we may not have that authority to appropriate what has been handed down. We even have court cases to that. As far back as the Camacho administration, we did go to court. And it is, this CARES Act today is resources that was awarded to the governor so that she can expend how she pleases. And that's why a report was given to us. And we do know that there's case law that can be shared. And I'm just telling you that I will stand corrected if that is not in order, but I am asking you to please look for it because I know it is.
Thank you. Senator Amanda Sheldon, you wanted to speak on the motion?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I asked for a recess, Mr. Chair, to ask for advice.
Yes, I'm going to ask that, but I wanted to hear from Senator Amanda because she's the author of the bill
Okay,
and
thank you,
just
sir.
see
I
what she's
apologize.
got.
Sure, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the author of the amendment. I do appreciate the amendment, as I am, as everyone else is in this room, glad to hear that CARES Act money is available. And I did draft a similar amendment to allow for the CARES Act funding to be utilized as an option. So maybe we can find some compromise in this amendment and look at it. And I would like the recess also.
Yes, we'll take a recess and I'll ask legal to take a look at both amendments and when we'll come up with an agreement. Thank you. Committee of the Whole has returned from recess. Before you speak, Senator Tello or Senator Amanda. Madam Speaker, you have some information you wanted to provide?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity on this moment's recess to look at the citation. And I just want to cite for the record that Section 1423J of Title 48 United States Code is paramount to the local legislation and provides that the United States Congress can make appropriations directly to the government of Guam, where these appropriations or grants completely fund a specific purpose without the need of local funding, and where the appropriations or grant does not provide for local legislative control, there is no authority for the Guam Legislature to assume the responsibility of reappropriating these funds. I want to read that for the record, and I understand, and I hope that that my colleagues can continue to work together to provide the necessary amendment needed to move forward and work with the administration.
Mr.
Thank
Chair,
you.
Mr. Chair, could she just cite what it is that she was reading? What's the?
Yes. Madam Speaker.
Yes, I will. This is the results from the Russell Wong Consumer Counsel, Deputy Consumer Counsel Petitioner versus Doris Camina, Director, Bureau of Budget and Management Research as the respondent. It's civil case number 78-001, District Court of Guam.
Okay, thank you. Senator Tello, wait, Senator Amanda, did you have any comment in reference to the amendment that was proffered by? Senator Amanda?
Yes,
No.
I'm
Madam
sorry,
Speaker.
Mr. Chair. With that, I was going to duly object, and hopefully someone can come up with an amendment that will work for this legislation.
Point of
because
information,
I said-
Mr. Chair.
So I object.
The only reason why is that this bill does not say shall. It says may. May be used to the,
Senator
may be
Tello,
used by.
it's not questioning the shall or the may. She just objected to your amendment. That's all she did. Huh. Okay? Does anyone else would like to speak on the amendment? Senator Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity we had to discuss with the committee as a whole. And during my questioning with the committee, I had, on my 2 rounds, I pretty much just asked the same question. And Lester was really good in answering it. First, one thing Lester pointed out that I understood and took notes on is that the timing of this money to be used, the CARES Relief Fund of the $117 million, needs to be spent by December 31st. Use it or lose it. And I asked Lester, can we use the CARES Fund for this purpose? And he says, yes, the first round. And he wants to use 100% of the CARES Fund for that on the first round. Then we had other questions to go through, and I asked the same question. Are you saying the CARES Act can be used 100% for the bill? And he said, yes, 100%. And they don't want to use the general fund or special fund or other funds identified. Adelup or Lester was clear on that. And he verified that it can be used for that. And they want to use the CARES Act. And he also added he wanted to actually recommended a recommendation or amendment for the bill to include another letter to say use the CARES Fund for the bill. So, it's coming from me. I feel pretty confident that we should use the CARES Fund. And they don't want to use other funds, so eliminate the other funds. So I'm in favor of this amendment, Mr. Chairman, based on my questions repeated and confirmed with BBMR. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Jim, I heard the same thing you said. But I would ask, is there anyone else that would like to speak on the amendment? Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. I mean, it's great if they're going to give this money from the CARES Act. If it's money that people need, if it's a relief that should have been given since we got this CARES money, they should give it out tomorrow. They shouldn't even wait for this bill to pass. And that's what they should be doing with the CARES money. And so if they're saying that they've only obligated $40 million and they're estimating another 10 for the hotels, and the rest seems still available, subject to correction by the agencies, but that's like 67 million left of the 117, and I don't know, I'm thinking if this money is sitting there and it's still available and there are still people in need, then of course it should go out. I'm very concerned that we have unemployed people. These unemployed people who have not received a single dime in unemployment. So that means for the last 3 months, they've received $1,200. And we know we cannot take care of our families with that. And anyways, we went through these funding sources with them, Mr. Chair, and in the end, although his letter said that there's 10 million or 4 million available from these funding sources, in the end, he pretty much, walked that back and said, no, there's not going to be money available from the general fund appropriations or the special fund appropriations or the war claims, because they've spent all the war claims fund, even though the law says they can't spend it without legislative appropriation. They've spent the war claims fund. And there's only 3 million in the rainy day fund. So yes, if they can use CARES, that's exactly where it should come from. So I support the amendment, absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Therese. Anyone else? I think Senator Torres, you raised your hand, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to also indicate that I object to the amendment, and the speaker read and cited to the civil case in the District Court of Guam from January 1978. And in that judgment, I think the operative words that we need to focus on and why this amendment is really inappropriate and unnecessary and perhaps should not be in our law is that at the very end of the order, the operative words are where the grant or appropriation provides 100% of the funding for a specific project or purpose, which is what CARES does, and which grant or appropriation makes no provision for local legislative control. The CARES Act makes no provision for local legislative control. It is given to the governor. And that is why I think that while we can allude that she can use it and stuff, I mean, that is her prerogative. And I asked that question of the panel when I asked whether it would be necessary, and I cited that section that where we said that where it says that they'll administer it and subject to the appropriations, and then they were talking about using CARES fund, and we had made that distinction that CARES fund is not subject to appropriation by this legislature. So I think that I agree with the speaker in citing that case of Wong versus Kamina from the district court case, because it specifically says that where it's given to you for a specific purpose, and there's no provision for local legislative control, then there shall be no legislative control. So I just want to emphasize that point, because I think that's really where we have to key in, and it's on page 134 of the judgment, if anyone wants to look at it. But it's very clear that is why we don't appropriate from federal grants, because it's not our prerogative to appropriate federal grants when they're given to us for a specific purpose and it's 100% federally funded. I mean, that's just the way I understood federal grants forever and a day, and I don't think anything will change. Thank you.
So that is an objection to the amendment.
Yes, I support the objection to the amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anyone else like to speak on the amendment? None, I'd ask the sponsor to please close, and then we'll move to the vote of the amendment.
Suzus Mosley, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I appreciate the comments from my colleagues and the reading of a case law regarding CARES funding and being utilized. However, my amendment does not say the word shall. It doesn't force the governor's hand to use CARES Act. In my amendment, very clearly, it says may be used by the Department of Revenue and Taxation. I'm just trying to figure out, where does it say in here that I'm mandating or requiring that the governor use CARES Act? I give her the option by saying may be used if she so pleases. And we've been hearing all night tonight from BBMR that they support using CARES funding for this. And then we've also heard that there's just no funding in the general fund to support $10 million right now. They also mentioned that. So we're being fiscally responsible here by, one, putting it into legislation to allow the governor, if she so chooses, to use the CARES funding for this bill. A bill that actually she can do on her own. It doesn't need, and that's what Lester said, it didn't need legislation. But it's nice that it's here and it's here today, so let's discuss this. This amendment, again, clearly just says may. It strikes out any chance of going into the general fund. Mr. Chair. Okay, there it is. The areas that were struck out was the general fund appropriation for a fiscal year 2020, as well as special funds appropriation. Mr. Chair, there's just no money there. What are we doing? If an amendment comes up after this amendment and maintains those two appropriations from the general fund and the special fund, somebody's going to be short. An agency, well, we already know it's going to be short already. We've got that from the CRE report. They're already short. This amendment just simply says may be used, and that if everybody here trusts the administration by saying, yes, we're going to use CARES Act for this bill, then I don't see a reason why not to support this amendment at all. Unless you don't trust the administration and you incorporate general fund and appropriation in there, because they might not use the CARES Act money. So, Mr. Chair, it's very, very fiscally responsible for us to vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Madam Vice.
The amendment states that of the funds received by Imagahag and Guahan through the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, Public Law 116-136, may be used by the Department of Revenue and Taxation. The amendment also crosses out the portion of the bill where it says the purposes of this act, and we cross out here as may be available from the following: fiscal year 2020 general fund appropriations, fiscal year 2020 special fund appropriations, 2% general fund deposit requirement pursuant to subsection 22904 of Article 9, Chapter 22, Title 5, Guam Code annotated, or D, any funds pursuant to subsection 13.101 of Article 13.1, Chapter 1, Title 5, Guam Code annotated, and any funds transferred pursuant to this act shall only be used for the purposes of this act. Everything that I just read were appropriation recommendations for the governor to be available to choose from has been crossed out. So we're not just saying that the governor may use CARES Act. We're crossing out every other option too. And so this is the meat of the bill is to give the governor that flexibility, because we don't really understand the whole impact of what CARES is doing in each appropriation. And so in order for us to really help the people and move it forward, we want to make sure that we don't get any excuses from the executive branch. We want to make sure that we've given you every avenue possible to help the people. We don't want to hear the excuses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. It was stated earlier that the Section C of this legislation is the rainy day fund, which there is no money in there.
Point of order,
Senator
Mr.
Tello.
Chair. It's
Senator
my
Tello.
understanding that there was already a
There
closure on this.
I'm doing a point of information, just like...
Senator Tello, let me recognize you first.
Okay, point of
Okay?
information.
Thank you. Madam Vice, could you please complete your point of information?
Yep.
Mr. Chair, all I'm saying is if you leave these appropriations in, then we can say, okay, now we're making it equitable. But it's removing it. It's removing it and just putting one option. So my point of information is saying that you can't just say that we're allowing only May. You're crossing out everything else. That's the point of information, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that question.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Okay. My colleagues, we are now going to move to the vote.
Mr. Chair, point of information. You gave her the opportunity. I was closing, and then you allowed somebody else to speak. My point of information, Mr. Chair, is that letter C, has already been stated by the administration in the 2% of the rainy day. There is no money there, and there is no money in the war claims,
Senator
which
Tello,
is D.
Nobody's questioning that. They're only commenting. Point of information, okay? So let's move. You need a recess? Okay, we'll have a short recess. My colleagues, we're going to come back from recess, and we're going to go to the vote. Okay? No more point of information on that. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is back in order. We will now move to the vote. All in favor of Senator Title's amendment, which reads, nope, no need. All in favor, please raise your hand. We signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion fails. Okay. Now we will move to my colleagues. I'm going by the clock, okay? So Senator Amanda Sheldon, ma'am, author of the bill. It's under FA 367 COTW ALS, line 13, page 6.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to find it. We have lots of amendments here in the drive. So this is also in the same section that we just addressed, beginning on line 13 of page 6. And this is to add the option of letter E to read, in the funding source, letter E, any coronavirus aid relief and economic security CARES Act funding available to Imagahagan Guahan. So in addition to the funding sources that were original to the bill, we add the CARES Act funding, which Mr. Carlson shared with us this evening would be the source of funding. So I don't wish to strike out any other option that we originally put into the bill, but to make mention of the CARES Act, which was announced tonight, will be used.
Does anyone like to speak on the motion? Stand by. Senator Luis Munoz, and then Senator Tello, and then Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought the point was made that we were not allowed as a legislature to tell the governor what to do with this, with the CARES Act, any federal funds. So why are we even entertaining putting an option in there? That's my question. My question to the author is, why are we entertaining to even put it in there when we're not even allowed to put it in there, period? That's my understanding.
That's your question. Senator Amanda, would you yield to the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment is simple. It adds the choice. It's the choice for the governor to transfer from any of these sources. It makes the coronavirus inclusive. The coronavirus becomes inclusive of these choices.
Is Senator Munoz, did that satisfy your question?
Yeah, well, the way I understand it is that the choice now makes it okay for us to tell the governor what to do with the CARES Act money. That's the way I understand it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Senator Tello, you have a question, ma'am, on the motion?
You know, my colleague spoke before me, made perfect sense. Here they were arguing putting in the CARES Act, and now it's okay. Just doesn't make any sense. But, you know, Mr. Chair, we are allowing the governor to go in, the administration to go in and use general fund appropriations. We're allowing her to do that. We're also allowing her to go in to use special funds. And we saw what's happening with special funds. I mean, the TAF is unbelievably low. Fuel tax is also special funds for fuel, liquid fuel is down. Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to object to this because it's not. Excuse me? Excuse me, Mr. Chair, someone's babbling back here. What?
Thank you. My colleagues, let's keep the order. Senator Tello,
Crying?
please complete.
Something? I don't know what, but making a lot of noise. And I have the floor, so out of respect, please, you'll have your time. So, Mr. Chair, we've heard from the administration. We heard that there is no funding available. $10 million. Somebody is going to be short, Mr. Chair. If they decide to use this, one of the agencies will be short. I mean, we're already short right now. So I have to object to this, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Senator Therese, you have a comment, then Senator Mary, you'll be followed by Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I too am questioning if it was not appropriate to suggest to the governor to use coronavirus aid relief in the last floor amendment. How is it possibly appropriate to put that into this amendment? We're just playing games here tonight, unfortunately. That's what it seems like. We went through this whole thing with BBMR and DOA, and they wouldn't answer the questions thoroughly for the first 4 funding sources. So now we're going to insist that they use the first 4 funding sources that they have insisted they do not want to use anymore. They repeated it maybe 5 times to me. No, Senator, we want to use the CARES Act now. Despite when I told them it's our choice what we're going to use, they said, no, we don't want those to be available anymore, and the only thing available is CARES. And speaking of CARES, they said that of the $20 million, they have $117 million, first of all. They have set aside $20 million for the small business program, and they said there's still money available there. They set aside $20 million for this public assistance payments to individuals. They said they've only spent 13. So there's $7 million right there. And they're offering to use it for this program. When everybody here knows, Mr. Chair, that they could do this program tomorrow, they could have done it 3 months ago. They could do it anytime they want if they're going to use CARES money. They don't need this bill. But, you know, we are trying to go through this charade of we're going to pass a bill, we're going to say it's CARES money that they're going to get to use, but, you know, I object to leaving in these other parts because they've said they've used the war claims money. They used the war claims money despite what the law says about the war claims money. So D is not available. C, there's only $3 million available. It's not enough. B, they didn't answer. A, they wouldn't answer where they're going to get that money from. And when we've got $117 million in CARES money, if this is really truly what we're trying to do is get this relief to people as soon as possible, then I just can't see why we're going to debate about a 1978 opinion regarding another type of funding sources.
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chair. Please.
What?
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I'm talking about, we're citing a 1978 opinion.
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
know if
Point of
that's
personal
actually
privilege, sir.
applicable
Stand
to
by.
these funds,
you
to
must
this
state-
case, and so I'm
Okay.
just saying, no one here
Sir,
Understood.
really knows.
Senator Therese,
I think I still have the floor,
can you
Mr.
just
Chair.
stand 1 minute and let's hear the point of
Point of
information?
personal privilege,
I ho-
sir.
I hope
I was
it's
the one
okay.
who brought up the matter in reference to the documentation, and she is insinuating that
I'm not
we're
insinuating
Yes,
anything,
she
Mr.
is.
Chair.
She's utilizing the...
I'm saying
Sir,
we
I
are
got the floor.
debating and we're talking about a
I'm just
court
asking-
case. That's a
Ladies,
fact.
ladies, let's keep the order here. One is speaking, you don't need to debate among each other across the room. She asked for point of privilege, that are stated and ended, and then I'll come back to you, Senator Therese. Madam Speaker, please state it and let's get it over with, and then let's go back to Senator Therese.
And Mr. Chair, I did, with all due respect, I did state that.
Okay.
And I'm saying, based on her presentation, I took a point of personal privilege. I was the one who shared with the perspective. Nobody's saying no here, and I'm definitely not saying no. I want to give our people that.
Okay.
And I said, based on what has been provided to us, and based on what we can do, if we give the opportunity for the administration to choose
Is this still
all this, I'm just saying that.
point of personal
She
privilege?
utilized and said that the statement that I brought up was not in order. I'm just telling you, Mr. Chair.
Didn't say that,
It's-
Mr. Chair.
It's understood.
Chair, understood?
Thank you,
Take my
Madam.
point, and I
Yes, I take your point. Senator Therese,
Thank you very much. I'm saying
let's
that
close it up.
we have talked about a court case as a basis for not putting coronavirus as the funding source here, which makes no sense to me because even if the court case applied, so the governor can't follow this law and she's not mandated to use coronavirus, but she can still use coronavirus. It has no impact. And so it doesn't harm. It does no harm. And I think the sponsor, I mean, we're here talking about coronavirus as if we're going to make an impact. So let's just do our best and try to make that impact as soon as possible.
Okay.
Let's tell them to use that money. But if we're going to start using all these other funding sources that they would not verify, then I think that's out of order, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Understood. So that's an objection to the motion. Am I correct, Senator Therese? Is that an objection to the motion?
Mr. Chair.
My colleagues, I asked the question after motion was made for the amendment. Do anybody want to speak on the motion? Either you're objecting or you're agreeing. You
I
can't
was
do either.
speaking on it, Mr. Chair.
You're
I was
speaking
just
on
speaking.
it. Okay, speaking on it, not objecting. Okay, Senator Mary Torres, you're next to be recognized. Nothing, Senator Lee.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair, I have a question for the author of this amendment, if she'd yield. I have a question for the author.
Yes, if Senator Amanda, do you yield to the question? Please state your question.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair. My question is just, what is the language, is the language that's being added in this amendment, is it identical to the language that was added in the previous amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This language adding the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, the CARES funding, that is the same to add the CARES Act funding. Where this amendment differs is that I do not strike out the previous options here. By striking out the first four options, we are essentially forcing the governor into using the CARES Act funding, which is what we cannot do.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair, that
Thank
makes
you.
things crystal clear. So this, adding this exact same language as in the previous amendment, all those that voted for the previous amendment should absolutely support this since it's the same language that's being used. Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Chair.
thank you. Does anyone else like to speak on the motion?
I
On
want
the
to
amendment?
say a point of information like
Okay.
was done in the last amendment. When they read to us the amendment and told us what was being struck out. In this amendment, those things are not being struck out, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on the amendment? If not, Senator Jim. You object to the motion? The amendment?
Yes.
The amendment,
Yeah,
okay.
correct, and I'd like to speak on it.
Oh, yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The case was argued previously in the last attempt for this amendment that there comes down to, if we're using that court case, that there should be no mention of any mandate or choice, it seems this way as well, referencing the federal funds for by this legislature in order for the governor to choose or not choose. I'm guessing then for those who voted that it was not voted in favor of is because it was entered into the amendment. And so therefore I had to object with this one too. If we're going to put the words in there, anything dealing with federal funds, then I guess based on the votes from the last one, it should not be, so I object. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So that's an objection. You would like to speak, Madam Vice, on the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, there were several things that have been brought up in this debate. One was a 1978 court case brought up by one of our colleagues, and that was an opinion of one of our colleagues. But also there was another one saying that, almost saying that this bill is not needed. In essence, this bill is worthless. And Mr. Chair, that's a difference of opinion as well, because Unfortunately, we have said that.
Point
in
of
this-
information, Mr. Chair. Point of information, it was not said that it was not
Point of
needed.
order,
It said
Mr.
that
Chair.
It could be.
The Vice
Mr.
Speaker
Chair,
has the
please give
floor.
some
Point of
decorum.
order,
There
Mr.
can be
Chair. The
some
Vice
respect.
Speaker
I
has
have
the
the
floor.
floor,
Ladies,
Mr. Chair. This judge shows some respect.
So, just.
Ladies,
Let me
my
finish.
colleagues, the next time I have to gavel down and I'm going to call you out of order, I'm going to have the sergeant arms do what he needs to do. Okay? Let's keep some order. And Madam Speaker, Vice Speaker, please finish your statement. And if anybody wants to comment, you can comment. Okay? Let's just go one at a time. We don't all need to shout over each other. Madam Vice, can you please continue?
Thank you,
And
Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Teller, you be followed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, there was a statement saying that this bill was not needed. But there have been many cases where several of us has entertained bills that we felt and we believed that was needed. So that is an opinion as well. And then there is a statement that we entertained a previous amendment. And so if we didn't vote for that previous amendment, then we should not vote for this amendment as well. But the difference between the amendments is in the first amendment, there was a cross out of all options of funding appropriations. I have submitted bills asking to use the CARES Act. So I have nothing against using the CARES Act and telling the governor that she may use the CARES Act. If this is an avenue that we need to try to utilize so that we can make sure that the people are given assistance, then let's try all avenues. Let's not just stop at one. And so that's why I stand in support of this amendment, because we are presenting all avenues so that in the end, hopefully, God willing, that the governor will sign this bill and not veto it, because we are giving her more than one option. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice. Senator Tello,
Point of information, yes, Mr. Chair.
they'll be the last speaker. Then we move to
Mr.
vote.
Chair, thank you for the point, to allow me that point of information. When it was commented that this bill was not needed, didn't finish the full sentence. The bill was not needed because the governor could do it herself already, was the point being made, that the governor can also do this. It didn't need legislation for her to act on this. And I appreciate the previous speaker mentioning that she has a bill that actually authorized CARES Act as well. The only difference is that this bill has money being used from the general fund, money that we don't have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we'll move to Senator Mars. You want to speak on the motion? Or Senator Kelly on the amendment? And then Senator Sabina, you want to speak on the amendment? Senator Kelly.
Assiduous Masi, Mr. Chair. There have obviously been a lot of points being brought up, and I agree with the previous speaker who made a couple of different points. With this, if we whittle things down to one, then it's not the true spirit of choice, and we need to be very careful here that we're not jeopardizing that which we're trying to provide as relief. And we do want to provide options. No one is insisting, as was used as a term earlier, and nobody is forcing, and nobody is guaranteeing that any of the options earlier, the A through D, are provided. But I do agree that we need to provide flexibility to ensure that this gets to the people who need it. And there were other misstatements about that it all has to come from A or all has to come from B. We need the flexibility. They have said that their preference is to use the CARES Act, but there are a whole lot of unknowns right now. So we need that flexibility. We don't know when the second wave is or if there's a second wave. Nobody wants to think about those things, but do we want something to be stopped? Because we weren't flexible, we didn't live up to the spirit that the federal government is asking us to. And I did also have concern. It's been mentioned over and over that this isn't needed, that it could be done. But the point is, we've been in this crisis for going on 3 months. We've been looking at the CARES Act money for a while, and it hasn't been done. So we are here to lead and make sure, to the best of our abilities, it does get done. I can probably think of 20 things off the top of my head that could be done with that CARES Act money, and I could question why those 20 things haven't been done. But here we are having an opportunity to say, this is important, we stand for it. And we're going to do our best to make sure it happens because we actually care about those people. So I'm here to provide flexibility. No matter what's coming our way, they have assured us that they don't want to use that other than the CARES Act. They want to be as responsible as possible. And I want to make sure that this legislation, this direction, this action actually happens. So I do support this amendment, and I just hope that people care enough about the uncertainty and the unknowns and actually make something happen. Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Sabina, we would need to pause. They need to reset the recording again. So we got to take another 10, 15 minutes. My colleagues, recess.